Hello everybody, it's me, your boy Matt, and I'm here to present to you the research of several years in a simple but comprehensive presentation called The Insulin Hypothesis, Health and Weight Loss. Now forgive me, I'm going to rush in many parts because there's an awful lot to cover, but I may also take a few detours because there's a lot of little facts and a little side alleyways in this conversation. So as you know, I am a bit of a maven and I like to do lots of research. And one subject that has interested me a lot is health, wellness, weight loss, athletics, that sort of thing. And so today I present to you the result of those many years of research. Several years, I should say. I will give my standard disclaimer, though, that everyone has to give, that this is not expert advice. And I certainly would not recommend taking any drastic action, especially if you are have a acute medical condition. Always consult your doctor about medications you may be taking or any diet. However, I do think that there is a lot of general advice here that could be helpful to a lot of people. And I want to approach this in two ways. In one way, I want to explain to you exactly why I believe what I believe, why I believe the insulin hypothesis to be true. But on the other hand, I also want to show you that even if you don't follow every step of the way, if you don't believe in every precept I present to you, that we can still agree on several common sense ways that you can improve your life, improve your lose weight, and increase health. Because after all, we're not just trying to lose weight. We're not just vain. We are trying to become healthier. So without further ado, let's get into it and let's talk about what the insulin hypothesis is. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is why should you even believe me? And where did all this information come from? Well, you shouldn't. What you should believe is what research has shown and the proof of your own eyes, right? So I like to show you a few guys who I have listened to. There's many, many, many more. There's Dr. Peter Attia, among others. There's a whole lot of excellent researchers and doctors and researchers who follow the same path. However, these are three guys that I think are very helpful to look at. And Gary Taubes here is who a lot of people follow in a certain sense, right? Because Gary Taubes is a lot like you and me. Gary Taubes is not a scientist, although he was trained as one, a physicist, I believe. He's not a doctor. What he is a scientific journalist. And what he did was he went to the what is it called? The literature. He went to the scientific literature. He read it. He analyzed it. And he said, is what we are being told in public health borne out in the scientific literature? And his conclusion was, to a large extent, no, it was not. Things that we're being told are not supported by scientific experiments. In fact, many times they're disproven by scientific experiments. So I want you and me to all be like Gary Taubes. We may not be experts, but what we can do is look at the evidence and look at the research, right? Number two is Dr. Jason Fung, right? I should back up and say Gary Taubes, he is an excellent place to start. He's an excellent person to read because he will actually take you through the history of diets and health and nutrition in America, and he will show you the scientific research and literature. So he's an excellent place to start. I recommend anything you can find on him on YouTube, and he has several books which are excellent, and he will recommend low carb, low sugar diets, and he'll tell you exactly why we've ended up where we are. Dr. Jason Fung is a doctor. He is a nephrologist, and as a nephrologist, he deals with diabetic patients a lot. But he noticed that his patients weren't getting better no matter what diet he put them on. So he is really into fasting. He really recommends fasting to help diabetics. And I put him on here as an example of a doctor who was tired of the lack of results that happens in mainstream medical practice. And then finally, we have a person who you'll probably consume the least amount of his literature, Dr. Robert Lustig, but he may be one of the most important people I mentioned. He is a endocrinologist, I believe a pediatric endocrinologist, and he was at one point the part of the American Heart Association. He helped write their guidelines for sugar intake. So he is a very prominent physician and scientific researcher, and he is a crusader against sugar. So I put him on here as a very accredited and respectable source. So before we talk about what the insulin hypothesis is, we need to back up and say, what is the current understanding of health and weight loss? So when anyone ever asks you, how do you lose weight? The thing they will always tell you is, oh, you just need to lose more calories than you eat, right? In order to lose weight, we need to burn more calories than we consume. And this is repeated as gospel. Now, the problem with this statement isn't that it's not true. In the words of the great Professor Fermi, it's not even wrong. It's just pointless. It's kind of a useless statement. First of all, yes, as they like to say, it is the first law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. Energy in equals energy out. You take more energy in than you expel, then you're going to gain weight. That's just a description, though. That's not saying how it's happening, right? So for one thing, even a very facile examination of this brings the process into question, right? Like, how do I lose more calories than I bring in, right? Is all the calories I'm eating going to be put in as fat? Are some of them going to leave me? Am I going to immediately burn some of those calories? Am I going to immediately store some of those calories? None of these questions are answered by simply saying energy in, energy out, right? Secondly, there's very poor scientific and anecdotal evidence for the calorie deficit model even working, right? So for decades now, maybe closer to 50 years, scientists have tried to use calorie deficit diets to get people to lose weight, and it doesn't work. What happens is people go into extreme deficits, i.e. starving to death for short periods of time. They starve themselves, and then eventually they can't do it anymore. It's torture, and then they break their diet, right? And we also have poor anecdotal evidence for this, right? How many of us know someone who's tried to go on a diet, right? Does it work? No, they're miserable, they're unhappy, and then eventually, even though they may have some initial success, but it slows down, and then they quit, right? So there's something here that is not going right? The calorie deficit model is insufficient, right? And a great quotation I have here, it's like saying, oh, if you want to save money, just earn more money than you spend. If someone gave you that advice, you'd slap them on the side of the head. Is it true? Sure, it's true. Is it useful in any slight way? It is not. It's a kind of a silly statement to make. So another question I get is, hey, if this is so wrong, if it's so bad, if all this has been pushed at us for the last 50 years, how is it wrong? Why has this been so popular? Well, there's a couple of reasons, some historical reasons, and I think that if you want to research more, there's a lot of research on the internet and in Gary Taubes's books, and you can go look this up yourself. So one of the most prominent figures was Ancel Keys, a scientist from the University of Michigan, and he was on an anti-meat kick. He did the 7-country study, where he studied 7 countries to examine their meat intake and their incidence of cardiac disease. And he displayed that and said, hey, look, all the countries that have high meat intake have high rates of cardiac disease. So he used this to push his low fat, high carbohydrate diets. And a little bit after that, the 1977 McGovern Commission, which was not even established to give dietary guidelines, decided that they were going to do that, right? And despite a big lack of scientific consensus, they decided that the way to go was to tell people to eat less meat, and they invented a term called complex carbohydrates. That was the first time it was ever used, pretty much, and they said, eat less meat, eat more complex carbohydrates. So that's where we get our beautiful food pyramid down here that tells you to eat lots and lots of bread, right? Now, one of the big knock-on effects of this is that when the food industry saw that they were being told that not to use fat, when fat was being demonized, they said, how are we going to make our food taste good? Well, we can't put fat in it. It'll taste bad if we don't have fat in it. So we're going to put in a lot of sugar, and that will make things taste good. So over the last, 40 years, lots and lots of sugar has happened, right? And of course, this may have happened to some extent anyway, because meat is more expensive to create than corn, soy, these kind of extremely, extremely cheap mass crops. Heck, corn and soy are even easier to make than wheat at this point. And another reason I think why the calorie deficit model is popular is that I don't think it's a moralistic thing, like thinking that people who can't lose weight are just weak or lazy, although some people seem to suggest that from time to time. The idea, not that that is true. I think it's more that people want to act like they have the answer. Oh, just do this. I think that they just want to act like they know what the solution is, and that they feel very gratified by saying that. However, the problem when you present a new position to someone is that it is not merely that they have to accept the new position, it's that they have to wrestle with all the possible positions, right? So I hear people say, I see 6 different diets. How am I supposed to know which one is right, which one is wrong? They're all just peddling their own religion, right? Well, I would try to suggest that there are some commonalities between good diets and bad diets, right? A lot of the quote unquote bad diets can be identified, not all of them, but can be identified by some kind of rigorous system, usually things where you have to buy something, right? If you have to have a bingo card to do your diet, that's probably a bad sign, right? And a lot of these are overtly commercial. Nutrisystem, Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig, they're all trying to sell you something. And even the ones who aren't trying to explicitly sell you something, they kind of have a small insular community, like the Ornish Diet or the Zone. In fact, I don't even know if I've ever met anyone who actually did the Ornish Diet. I think Ornish Diet and Furman are just stealth vegetarian ideologues, to be honest. I think they're just trying to push vegetarian ideology, and they've shown an astonishing disregard for science. Now, if you look at the quote-unquote good diets, someone might say, oh, look at all these diets. Which one of them is right? Well, I would say that if you look at these diets at the bottom, they're all kind of the same. The Atkins diet, the keto diet, both of those are saying reduce your carbohydrate intake, reduce your processed food intake, reduce your sugar intake. In fact, the Atkins diet was kind of a victim of its own success because it was so successful and so popular that it got attacked. And despite the fact that it was super successful and super effective, people they wanted to make it seem less extreme. So they started moderating. So if you want a good Atkins diet, go to the old one. Don't go to the new one that tells you eating soy bars is fine. I don't know, but I don't know what they do exactly, but they've tried to moderate it not because it wasn't successful, but because it was so successful that they got a target painted on their back. These other diets couldn't let the success of the Atkins diet destroy them all. And then we also have intermittent fasting, which is I would argue is an element of reducing your carb intake, but focusing on the time aspect rather than just the nutritional quality aspect. And this last one down here, banting, you may not have ever heard of this, but this was actually the first fad diet. Way back in the, I believe, 18th or 19th century, there was an English gentleman named Banting, and he wanted to lose weight. So he talked to his doctor, and his doctor had read some pamphlets. This was basically how scientific journals circulated in the past. He read some stuff from France, some scientific experiments from France that said, hey, if you want to lose weight, reduce your carb. Cruciferous vegetables is what they call them. Potatoes, corn, reduce your carb intake, stop drinking wine, stop eating desserts, and just eat meat and vegetables. And well, what does that sound a lot like? That sounds a lot like Atkins and keto, right? And so Banting actually wrote a book about his success losing weight, and that became sort of the first fad diet. And as you can see, it's a lot like Atkins and keto. So I would argue that a lot of these good ones do have commonalities, whereas these bad ones are all going to rely on gimmicks, bingo cards, what have you, or commercially prepared meals. Did I spell vegetarianism right? I hope I did. So what about vegetarianism? Now, I don't want to come out and say that I despise vegetarianism. Maybe I do. I will say that the average vegetarian is healthier in the United States than the average non-vegetarian, right? However, there is a huge problem about doing that comparison. And the problem with that is that vegetarianism isn't just a diet. It is an ideology. And vegetarians are going to be much more health conscious than just everybody else, right? There are not too many people who are actually carnivores and just eat a carnivorous diet because they have an ideology that they're going to be very health conscious. There are a few people like that, but not too many. So if you are extremely unhealthy because you're on an average American diet and you switch over to vegetarianism and are extremely careful with what you eat, then I have no doubt that you're probably going to get healthier. Now, actually, I've seen people in more recent times be vegetarian, in these younger generations, they be vegetarians, but they'll eat chips, they'll eat soda, etc., and they're actually not as healthy as you might think, right? They're pretty much just as unhealthy as everybody else. Now, what about the specific, pros and cons, right? So I think vegetarianism is making a micronutrient argument, right? They're saying, oh, saturated fats are going to get into your bloodstream, and that sort of thing. However, I'm going to make a macronutrient argument. I'm going to say that the whole energy system is being compromised by what you eat, right? So it's kind of like eating burned meat, right? Some people say eating burned meat may cause a little bit of cancer, right? An uptick in cancer incidence. Well, that might be true, but is it cancer that's destroying our whole society? Is it cancer that's taking over, Western Europe and United States and Canada and is skyrocketing in China and India? No, that's not it. It's diabetes is what's skyrocketing across the world, not colorectal cancer. So, avoid your burnt meat, but I don't think that's the big fish that we need to be worried about, right? So what you really have to think about is, am I going with the ideological response, or am I going to give them practical advice, right? Because a lot of people might be like those other people I just described, where they just cut out the meat and they keep eating their chips and their Coke, right? The other problem with that is that there's only two main energy sources, right? There's carbohydrates and fats. And when you tell people to stop eating animal fat, well, what are they going to do? they're only going to be eating carbohydrates, right? They're going to be eating more bread, more pasta, etc., right? And as I put in this first bullet, meat consumption hasn't actually increased in the last 100 years or so. So the bad thing that we're supposed to be eating hasn't been increasing in consumption, but our diseases have been increasing, right? So riddle me that. So what I think the problem with telling people, oh, just become vegetarian, is that they're not going to be treating their body as a temple. And this goes for low-fat diets as well, right? People who say, oh, eat very, very low fat, eat lots of carbs. You know, they don't understand the implication that they're doing. They think that they're going to be eating spinach and quinoa when they're going to be eating, you know, Jenny Craig frozen dinners. That's not going to increase their health. All right, so first, before I explain to you exactly what the insulin hypothesis is, I like to explain the problem. And everybody, sorry, getting a drink of coffee there. And everyone knows what the problem is. But they may not know that it's all wrapped up in one bundle. And this bundle is called Metabolic Syndrome. And the three big ones: obesity, high blood sugar, edema, right? Or in other words, heart disease, lipid problems in your cardiovascular system, hypertension, the high blood sugar leads to diabetes, the edema leads to hypertension, polycystic ovarian syndrome is another symptom of high blood sugar, and then non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And of course, you also have other concerns like cancer and dementia, but that's not really in the scope of this presentation, right? So this is all the problems of modern society wrapped into one bundle. Now, what causes this problem? The previous problem says that this is all just caused by being too fat. All just caused by being too fat. That's what the calorie hypothesis says, calorie deficit hypothesis, or by eating a little bit too much more meat. So just reduce, stop eating steak and exercise more and everything will be cured. I don't think so. The insulin hypothesis is a theory which states that this metabolic syndrome is caused in large part by the overabundance of insulinogenic foods in our diet. Insulinogenic means creating insulin. I definitely do not want to say that this is the only issue. There are other factors, right? One factor is the high amounts of fructose. Fructose is a sugar which is found in plants. It is a vestigial sugar that is not used by humans very well. So it gets stored on your liver and causes fatty liver disease, much like if you were an alcoholic. And yes, there are plenty of bad fats. The big one being trans fats, right? Like hydrogenated soybean oil, which I believe is being phased out now. Is esterified oils any better? We don't know. And there could be a huge inflammatory factor, which we're not even going to talk about too much in here. There's issues with gut health. There's issues with lipids. But these are all micronutrient issues, which may or may not be addressed with macronutrient interventions. So I'm going to be keeping those off to the side. Those might be things for you to investigate in the future, though. Right now, I want to focus on the overabundance of insulinogenic foods. So first of all, what is insulin? Insulin is a hormone. That means it's a little floaty messenger in your body that is created by the pancreas. And it is the second most anabolic, meaning tissue-forming hormone after testosterone. So imagine the differences between men and women that is caused by testosterone, the amount of testosterone, not just it being there, because women have testosterone too, much less, but they still have it. Now imagine a similar scale of body transformation being caused by a hormone. That is how powerful insulin is. And the difference is there really isn't too many ways to control testosterone in your body. You cannot make more testosterone easily. You can do a few things, but not too much. However, you can make your body make lots and lots and lots of insulin if you tell it the right things. So the main function of insulin and this is what you'll always read in the science books, in the health books. Its main function is to signal cells to absorb glucose from the blood. So when you eat something with carbohydrates, with sugar, or even just pure protein, what will happen is your body will release insulin, and that will attach to insulin receptors on your cells, which almost every cell has, and that will tell the cell to absorb the glucose from the blood, right? So you get high blood sugar temporarily, and then insulin comes out and clears that high blood sugar. However, it also has a secondary function of telling the cells to store fat, right? So this actually, all of these roles make perfect sense, because when there is sugar in the blood, the cells can absorb it and they can store the fat. Likewise, when there is no insulin, that is a signal to the cells to release fat. And that makes perfect sense as well, because when there's a low blood sugar and no insulin, then that is when your body should release fat so that the cells have energy. It also, crucially, it is a major satiety, aka hunger hormone. Now, this also makes perfect sense, right? Because it's a circular process, right? Because not only does your body release insulin to absorb the sugar, but it will also release insulin to signal that you are hungry and that you are needing to eat sugar, right? Because you eat at about the same time every day, right? So your body will get used to releasing insulin at the same time every day to absorb the sugar. Now, this is extremely important, because this is going to be a factor in our diet strategy, is controlling this hunger, right? We talked about how in the calorie deficit model, you will be essentially starving yourself. You will be hungry all the time. You will be miserable all the time. Your body wants to eat. And if you can't control that hunger, you're going to be miserable and you're not going to be able to stay on the diet. Now, where does this become a problem? Like we said before, eating carbohydrates releases the insulin. However, if you constantly eat carbohydrates, which are the insulinogenic food, think glycemic index. It's not exactly aligned with the glycemic index, but it's about the same ballpark. If you're constantly eating carbohydrates, if you're eating chips, if you're eating cookies, if you're drinking sugary drinks all day long, what's going to happen is that your body will be constantly producing insulin and releasing it into the blood to clear the sugar. And if you have this high insulin levels for a long time, what happens is that the cell receptors start to develop insulin resistance, just like any other drug or anything else, whether it be caffeine or a drug like an opioid. You're going to require more and more over time. Eventually, however, what's going to happen is that your body is going to develop such a level of insulin resistance, it's going to need more and more insulin to clear the blood sugar. And eventually your pancreas isn't going to be able to keep up. It's going to reach its limit. And you'll be sitting at this constant level of insulin, but your body won't be able to clear your blood sugar because your cells are so insulin resistant. This is what's called diabetes, or specifically diabetes type 2, right? And this is where the geniuses in the medical establishment say, oh, the solution to this is let's give them even more insulin. Which, as you can imagine, how sustainable do you think that is? So consequences of insulin resistance. One, you're going to have high blood sugar because your body is producing all this insulin, but because the cells are resistant, they're not going to want to take it in. You're sending the signal, but nobody's home, essentially. The knock on the door is happening, but nobody's opening the door. So this is where this can become a medical emergency if you have too high blood sugar. Another important aspect is the weight gain. The cells are told to store the fat and they can't release it, right? If you have constant levels of insulin in your body, then you're going to attach fat, and then the fat's not going to be able to leave the cell because insulin is saying, nope, you stay in there. And this is where people will first see insulin resistance, is they will gain weight. In fact, they will probably be gaining weight even before they develop insulin resistance. Another big aspect, like we mentioned before, is you're going to have constant hunger, right? Because your body is going to release insulin to clear the blood sugar, but because the blood sugar isn't going away, you're just going to have the insulin in your body still, in your bloodstream, and you're going to be constantly hungry. Another small side effect, which I'm not going to go into too much right now, is swelling of extremities, right? You've heard of water weight. That has a huge amount to do with insulin and carbohydrates. If you eat carbohydrates, you will be gaining water weight. So if you have, edema around your ankles, then you can blame that because of insulin resistance. Now, how do we avoid or even reverse insulingenic foods? Well, there's two ways of doing that. One, there's the quantity, obviously, right? Just pure quantity. If you're eating 200 grams of carbohydrates a day, that is not ideal. That is not healthy at all, right? A can of Coke has 40 grams of carbohydrates, of sugars. That is an awful lot. So number one, let's get rid of that quantity. Some numbers I've heard are 40 grams to 20 grams. Anything below 20 grams, you're going into low carbohydrate territory. I wouldn't expect anybody to try to do below 20. So 60, 40, let's try to stay in that area. Another smaller aspect, but still important aspect of this is the ease of digestion. And this is where the glycemic index was onto something, because there is a difference between easily digestible versus more difficult to digest foods, or less refined or more refined. If you eat a whole potato, that's going to be a lot harder to digest than mashed potatoes, right? Because the mashed potatoes are already digested in some sense, right? Likewise, white bread is much easier to digest than whole wheat bread, because whole wheat bread has been pounded out, right? And there's a big problem with agricultural products today in general, because we've engineered our wheat and our corn and even our animals to some extent, to such an extent that a wheat grain or a corn kernel are producing so much more carbohydrates than they were before. And the indigestible part is so much smaller. Now, I'm not a big fan of whole wheat bread, but there is still going to be a small difference between the two. Another example would be oranges versus orange juice. If you sit and eat an orange, it takes a few minutes for you to do that. There's some fiber in between it. That's going to take a little bit of digestion. Versus orange juice, which is like 5 oranges worth of juice and sugar that you can drink in a couple of minutes, right? That's going to be a huge sugar spike. Now, there's quantity, but there's also timing, right? In a sense, it would be better for you if you were to eat your entire day's carbohydrates in one sitting, right? Because if that were to happen, your body would release the insulin, and then it would clear it from the blood, and you'd be done. And then your insulin would go down. However, if you're eating insulingenic foods all day long, 6 to 12 times a day, which some people do, they're just constantly snacking on chips, on Cokes, etc., then your insulin is going to keep spiking throughout the day. And there's never going to be a time in which your blood insulin level goes down to 0. Now, fiber and I have a complicated relationship. Fiber, as I mentioned before, technically does blunt the insulin response a little bit. However, what people say when they mean fiber is not always what what the people think they mean when they say fiber isn't always what the industry means when they say fiber, right? When people say fiber, they think of super healthy things like spinach and broccoli and all sorts of great things like that. However, when you see fiber in the packaging, or this thing is high in fiber, what they're talking about is wheat or corn or oats or that sort of thing, right? So go ahead, eat all the spinach and all the broccoli you want. That's not fiber the way that they think that it means, right? The bad fiber, I suggest you really avoid that, right? Now, there is some suggestion that good fiber, aka stuff like spinach and broccoli, does contribute to gut health, and that the wheat and sugar contributes to inflammation. That's something to think about, but I think that's a little bit outside the bounds of this discussion. Now, here we come. We finally come to my personal food rank, and this is discussing what I think you should eat and how much of it you should eat, and actually what are the good foods, what are the bad foods, right? We've already talked about we need to avoid the insulinogenic foods, and we need to eat other things, right? Because there is a duality here, right? Where are we going to get unoffending energy and what has good micronutrients, right? So this is where the theory and the practice really merge. And I really hope that even if you didn't agree with everything I've said before now, that you can come along with me on this journey and that you'll agree with me, right? So for instance, we're starting at the bottom here, the X group. Soda, sugary drinks, chips, candy, junk food. I think we can all agree this is garbage. There's no reason that you need to eat it at all. It's terrible, right? It's just mouth enjoyment. That's the only reason you would ever use any of these things. Now, people who are defending the calorie deficit model will say, if I drink a Coca-Cola and then go for a run, I'm fine. That's perfectly fine, right? I would suggest that's really stupid. First of all, the insulin hypothesis says no, you're going to go for a run and then you're going to want to drink a Gatorade, right? But I also think it's really dumb to think in this way. Now on to F. So for X, get rid of that stuff yesterday. If you're trying to lose weight, trying to improve your health, you need to cut all of that from your diet yesterday. Then there's bread and pasta. Now, bread is just cake. Let's be honest. Bread is cake and pasta is gummy cake, right? For one, there is no nutrition in these things. In fact, there's so little nutrition in it that they have to put nutrition like vitamin A and D into bread after they make it because it's so bad, right? But bread and pasta don't have any essential nutrition in it, right? They're just calories. So if you're trying to lose weight, get rid of that today. Bad, right? All right. So now in the rest of these ranks, I'm going to speak harshly, but I want you to do what is best for you, right? Number one, I want you to pick a diet that you will stick to, right? And this can be a progression, and how slow the progression is can be up to you. But if you're feeling comfortable in your diet and you're not happy with your results, that's when you need to go and look at the food ranks, look at the chart, and make some changes, right? So from D on upward, I'd say D and C are the concession ranks. These are the how can I get on a diet and eat more healthily without feeling completely terrible all the time, right? So D is the meh rank, potatoes, rice, and corn, aka the complex carbs and starches. But they're essentially just pure starch, pure carbohydrates, right? This might be a good beginner rank, but I suggest you move on from it as quickly as you can, right? Again, a big problem with rice and corn is that they may have been fine in the past, but they're really, really refined right now. And corn is just in absolutely everything. So D is really, I'm not going to get angry at you, but I will be a little disappointed, right? Maybe keep these down to once a week at the very beginning and try to get rid of them as quickly as you can. Now C rank is the I'm trying to go low carb, but I just feel so terrible without them that I need something, right? And I put legumes, aka beans, and peanuts, and lentils. Now again, everybody has their own opinions. Some people think beans are terrible. And of course, if you eat a lot of beans, you're going to face other issues besides lack of weight loss. You're going to have some serious issues in your life, interpersonal or relationship issues. So that's up for you to decide. Maybe that will be your nice little motivation to go ahead and cut that out, right? The final three ranks, S, A, and B, are the ones that I would say are things that are part of a healthy, balanced diet, right? So nuts and berries. Nuts and berries can be problematic. They can be dangerous. However, they have so many benefits to them that a limited amount of them can be very beneficial, right? So nuts have a lot of great fats and oils. They're a great a great high fat snack for you. However, they do have a little bit of carbs, probably the best carbs you can eat, really, apart from meat. So I would say, maybe a handful of nuts every other day or so. Not too often. And then berries, especially like blueberries or blackberries, blueberries just have so many great micronutrients. It's hard to cut them out completely. So I would say, again, a handful of fresh berries once or twice a week, not going crazy, not going overboard, but they definitely can be considered to be part of a healthy diet in moderation. A are things that I think are good, are inoffensive. However, you have to be careful not to go overboard, right? There's a problem when you're constructing a diet because like the problem goes, right? If you say you can eat all the bananas you want, some wacko is going to go get 50 bananas and eat them all in a day and have kidney failure, right? So you have to be very careful. And so dairy, fish, chicken, and pork, I would say enjoy as much as you want. Just don't go too crazy. Dairy I think is pretty decent, but it does tend to have a little bit more carbohydrates than you necessarily want. And of course, there's all these concerns about hormones and all sorts of things like that. Fish, similar issue. Fish can be great. It has great omega fatty acids. The problem again with fish though is you don't want to be eating a high mercury fish. That might cause you problems down the line. Chicken is good. It's not the best, but it's okay. It's a nice neutral meat. And then again, pork, it's pretty good, but I would not eat it every single meal for a long period of time. It's just a bit of a weird one. Pork is, so something like bacon is fine to eat. I just wouldn't eat it every single day. And then we have our S class, which is the creme de la creme, the amazing ones. Eggs, beef, leafy greens. Eggs, they're so great you can make an entire animal out of them, right? A word of warning, always eat the entire egg. If you eat egg whites, that's not good. You will give yourself an insulin spike if you eat pure protein. Beef is great. One reason I put beef and eggs above chicken is because it is so much easier to find good quality beef and eggs rather than good quality chicken. You can go to almost any grocery store nowadays and get some high quality beef or high quality organic eggs. High quality organic chicken, not so much. And then leafy greens, I think they're kind of overrated. Some people suggest that the reason why leafy greens are even good is because the toxins stimulate our immune system. But, I don't think that for the most part that they have too many problems with them. So go crazy. Salads are great as a plate, as a conveyor of salad dressing and bacon and hard-boiled eggs and stuff like that, right? I didn't mention it on here, but I would suggest if there are any oils or dressings that you want to use, keep it natural. Use natural. Vinegar is obviously good. Olive oil is good. Don't use hydrogenated products. Vegetable oil, from what vegetable does the oil come from? Vegetable oil is a petroleum product. Eat things that are real. Eat grapeseed oil, eat olive oil. If you use a balsamic vinegar or something like that, just make sure it's low carb, low sugar. And in case you're wondering, I don't think you should count carbs, but if you are trying to aim for something, I would say, like I said before, 60 grams is probably where your ceiling needs to be. Try to eat below 60 grams. 40 grams is a great target. And then 20 grams and below, that's when you really are eating at a low carb diet. Now, the second concept I want to talk about, besides just insulingenic foods, is fasting. Now, fasting is abstaining from eating or drinking for at least 8 to 12 hours. And everyone is fasting, right? It's called break fast. You can't break the fast if you didn't fast, right? So everybody should be fasting from like 8 o'clock at night to 8 o'clock the next day, right? That should give your body plenty of time to reset. And during this fasting period, insulin levels should fall. And there's several other helpful processes like, what is it called? Well, basically your body will eat the cells that are dying or dead, and that helps clear out your body. There's been a lot of recent research on this, and it's really quite interesting. It's called autophagy, or self-eating. So this isn't the time or place, but that's a pretty interesting thing to look into. Now, intermittent fasting is when we are having a pattern of fasting so that we're extending this fasting period to longer than 12 hours so that we can gain some benefit from it, right? And fasting has been shown to reverse insulin resistance and diabetes because your diabetes is caused by constant levels of insulin, and if you fast for longer periods, then the insulin level will go down to 0, right? So this is the Dr. Jason Fung area of expertise if you want to go look up some of his videos. The easiest way to begin fasting, because it seems very intimidating, very daunting, right? Oh no, I can't skip a meal, you know? You don't die in the middle of the night because you didn't eat at 12 o'clock in the morning, right? So skip breakfast. Have you ever noticed that when you skip breakfast, you're not actually hungry until lunchtime? That ever happened to you? You don't die. You don't have a panic attack. You don't have a sugar crash. You're actually not even that tired, are you? If you skip breakfast, you won't even notice it. Some examples of fasting are 8-hour window, which is essentially skipping breakfast, right? I may have 2 or 3 small meals from 12 o'clock noon to 8 p.m. So that's my 8-hour window. So I'll be fasting for 16 hours. OMAD, which is essentially a 23-hour fast where you only have a 1 hour to eat, a 1 meal per day. That's what OMAD stands for, 1 meal a day. And then there are longer fasts that may last from 48 hours to 72 hours. But obviously those are not ones that you do every day. Those are just kind of kickstart, kind of jumpstart fasts. So these are the two paradigms. These are the two concepts that you need to follow in order to lose weight, reduce insulin resistance, reverse diabetes, etc. So like we said, insulin causes the hunger, right? So the low carbs will result in hunger, right? If you first start off and you're extremely diabetic or have prediabetes and you stop eating carbs, expect to be really hungry at first. However, if you stop giving the carbs to the diabetes, you'll stop producing so much insulin, right? It's a lot like having a hangover. If you drink alcohol during a hangover, you'll feel better, right? But that's not solving the problem. The only way to cure the hangover is to stop drinking the alcohol and letting nature run its course, so to speak. Now, when you are dealing with things like this, you need to be extremely careful. You know, don't stop taking medication. Don't stop following the advice of your doctor, right? So if you have diabetes, be careful about your blood sugar. Use the food ranks to pick a low carb option that is standable, right? If you have no experience with this whatsoever, you don't want to go cold turkey necessarily. A lot of people have. A lot of people have said, put that pack of cigarettes down and said, I'm done. But for a lot of people, that's a way to failure, right? So do whatever you think you can handle. You are suffering from addiction, right? You are a drug addict, and your drug of choice is sugar. So what you need to do is you need to step away from it as cleanly and as safely as possible. Now, fasting is the best way to do this, right? I've tried keto and I've tried fasting, and they work great together, but fasting is almost better than keto. Like, you could have a normal diet and fast, and that would almost be better than keto without fasting. Because keto is I'm eating really good foods, whereas fasting is I'm not eating any foods at all. And when that's happening, the pendulum is swinging hard the other way, the way you want it to go, right? Whereas keto very often is in neutral gear. Now, I'd like to end this with a few questions and answers that I've provided and some observations that I hope will, put a little bit of common sense into a lot of, new and strange concepts and ideas, right? So one thing I hear a lot is, aren't these diets about eating a bunch of meat? Isn't that gross? That Atkins and keto is just people just shoveling bacon and heavy cream into their mouths all day long. That's not what it's like. First of all, meat has not really increased in consumption very much in the last century. Like I said, you don't really need to eat much more meat. In fact, you may not eat any more meat at all. You might even eat less meat, right? What I'm suggesting is, if you have a meal that's a chicken breast, a cup of rice, a cup of broccoli, and a sweet tea, what you need to do is change the sweet tea to water and take the rice off the plate. If you eat that chicken breast and that broccoli and drink your water, that's all you need to do. And you'll probably feel more full afterwards, right? Because you haven't eaten that rice and drinking that sweet tea to stimulate your hunger, your insulin. Also, I dare you to eat a lot of bacon. Make a lot of bacon and eat it every morning. See how far you get. I guarantee you by like day 4, you'll be disgusted with bacon. You cannot eat that much. Or eat some sour cream. See how many spoonfuls of sour cream you can get in your mouth before you just absolutely want to throw up. They actually did an experiment where they went into a prison and offered them all the meat they wanted. And they said, I want you to eat 10,000 calories worth of meat. Let's see if we can get you fat on meat. And the prisoners couldn't do it. They would eat like 3,000 or 4,000 calories of pork chops, and they'd stop. They'd like, I cannot do anymore. I literally can't eat that much meat. And ignorant comment. You're going to eat too much bacon and saturated fat. Right? I've already said this actually. Make a bunch of bacon, eat 3 spoonfuls of sour cream. Saturated fat, your body does not like that much of it. It loves a little bit. It doesn't want that much. Oh, by the way, dietary cholesterol has nothing to do with blood serum cholesterol, and never has any scientist ever said so. They just literally said, well, this would be too complicated to explain, and we hate everything with dietary cholesterol in it anyway, so we'll just tell them to stop eating. We'll just demonize everything with dietary cholesterol, even though it has nothing to do with serum cholesterol. All right, so here's some observations, right? We know the Chinese and Italian paradox, right? You eat your pasta and it fills you up, but then an hour later you're hungry, right? That's because the carbohydrates in the pasta has cleared your insulin temporarily, but it's also stimulated the release of more insulin, and so now you're hungry again. Another observation would be you don't get full eating the steak, right? You eat the steak, you're not that full. You don't have that sense of fullness. But you eat the mashed potatoes and now you're full. However, strangely, weirdly, who's ever finished a steak and thought, you know what, I could have another steak? I don't think too many people. However, how many people eat that serving of mashed potatoes and say, you know what, I want some more mashed potatoes? When you go back to the Thanksgiving buffet, do you get a second serving of meat, of turkey? Usually not. Usually you go back to get more fruit, more sweet potatoes, more mashed potatoes, potatoes au gratin. And then the observation that I made earlier, if you eat breakfast, you will be hungry by 10 o'clock. But if you skip breakfast, you won't be hungry before lunch. This is because you haven't broken your fast. Your body is still fasting, which means no insulin. So your body isn't wanting more food. However, if you eat the food, if you eat the fast, break the fast, your body will produce insulin, which eventually will cause you to become hungry, right? Observation number 3, anyone in Texas should know this. If you want a cow or a pig to be fat, you feed them grain and corn. That's what grain finished means. That's what grain fed means, right? Grass fed means lean meat. Corn fed, grain fed means fat meat. In fact, what a lot of ranchers will do is they'll feed them on grass to get nice protein, and then they will finish them with corn or grain. That's what grain finished means, right? Observation number 4. This always blew my mind when people said, oh, if you want to lose weight, just eat small meals throughout the day. That's silly. That's ridiculous. That's what bodybuilders do. They're trying to build tissue. So they're eating constantly throughout the day. A, because insulin is anabolic, and B, they're trying to eat as many calories as possible. Except you're not getting muscular, you're getting fat, right? So you want to eat less frequently. And observation number 5, this is a personal piece of advice from me, right? And my advice is that fence sitting sucks. You know, when you go back and look at those food ranks, you might say, oh, I'll sit, going back over here, I'll go and sit on D. I'll eat potatoes, rice, and corn, only whole potatoes, only whole brown rice, you know, and that's the only ones I'll eat. But I'll only eat 40 grams. Well, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. Either you're not going to have any success at all because you're eating too many of those, or you're going to not eat enough and you're just going to be hungry all the time because you're still feeding the beast. It's like if you have a dog and you're only feeding him half as much as he should. So now you have an angry dog because he's only eating half as much as he should, but you're still feeding him. Stop feeding the angry dog, right? What I found is that no carb is often easier than low carb, because if you fast, if you eat a low carb diet, that will curb your insulin problems the quickest, the fastest, right? Fasting is the fastest, right? And I suggest, well, if you're at this level, if you're not, don't worry about it, don't do it. A prolonged fast will get rid of hunger the fastest and jumpstart your diet. Your liver holds like 2 weeks worth of sugar on it in the form of glycogen. So if you are trying to do a low carb diet, you may not see any results whatsoever in the first couple of weeks because your liver still has plenty of glycogen stored. However, a prolonged fast will burn through that in just a couple of days. I'm not saying this is what you should do, but this is definitely something to think about in terms of, at least conceptually, right? And in conclusion, I would say to make a plan, pick a place in the quality timing curve, and realize you're going to have to make some changes. You're not going to be able to just do 95% of what you have been doing and see radical results. If you want something that you've never had before, you're going to have to do something you've never done before. And finally, you need to stay consistent. You're going to see results very quickly. I promise you that if you follow it. However, the results will reverse just as fast if you fall off the truck. I myself have fallen off the truck many times, fallen off the cart, right? Several times. And if you go back to eating like garbage, your body's going to go back to being garbage, right? Well, I hope you've gotten some small pearls of wisdom from here. Stay safe. Don't do anything silly or stupid. Ask questions, like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you guys next time. Toodles.